The sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the dusty plains of Wyoming. Caleb Cal Stone rode with a grim, practiced silence, his gaze fixed on the horizon. At 28, his face was a map of the trails he'd traveled, leathery, etched with faint lines of a life lived outdoors. The brim of his worn hat cast a deep shadow over his eyes, a shield against both the sun's glare and the world he had come to distrust. His horse, a sturdy bay named Ranger, was as familiar with solitude as he was, its hooves kicking up clouds of ochre dust with every rhythmic step. Cal was a man defined by absence. He didn't have a home, not a true one. He had no family, no friends he could call his own. His life was a series of jobs, a string of cattle drives and lone rides. He moved with the seasons, from one ranch to the next, always leaving before the roots could take hold. It was a self-imposed exile, a prison of his own making, born from a past that haunted him more than any ghost. He had a reputation as a hard worker, a man of few words, and a cowboy who could handle a herd better than any other. But whispers followed him, a man who never touched a woman. In the saloons and bunkhouses it was a source of cruel jests, but Cal never flinched. He had his reasons, and they were buried deep beneath years of hardened resolve. Today, his trail was less a choice and more a consequence. He'd just finished a job wrangling a herd of longhorns across the Badlands. The money in his pocket felt heavy, but his spirit was light. He was heading south, away from the familiar faces and the prying questions. He just wanted to find a quiet place to rest, to be with his thoughts and the endless sky. The afternoon wore on, the heat a physical presence. Cal's throat was parched, his canteen nearly empty. He urged Ranger forward, hoping to find a stream or a watering hole before nightfall. It was then that he saw it. A plume of black smoke, thick and unnatural, rising against the pale blue. It wasn't a wildfire. The smoke was too concentrated, too dark. It was coming from the direction of a small valley he knew of, a place where a few homesteaders had tried to make a life. A knot tightened in his stomach. He wasn't a lawman, wasn't a hero. His instinct was to ride away, to avoid the trouble he knew that smoke signified. But something in him, a flicker of the decency he had worked so hard to bury, wouldn't let him. He spurred Ranger into a canter, the horse's hooves eating up the ground. The scent of burnt wood and ash grew stronger, a bitter perfume on the dry air. As he crested the final rise, the sight below him was a stark portrait of ruin. A small farmhouse, once proud and white, was a charred shell. Its roof collapsed. A barn stood precariously, one wall a gaping burned-out maw. The air was still thick with the acrid smell of smoke, and more disturbingly, the metallic tang of blood. He dismounted, his hand instinctively going to the Colt Peacemaker on his hip. He moved with a quiet, careful gait, his boots crunching on scorched earth. He found the man first. An older farmer, probably in his 50s, lay on the ground near the well. A deep, bloody gash marred his leg, and his face was pale with shock and pain. His eyes were open, glazed and staring at the sky. Cal knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. It was faint but steady. The man groaned, a low, guttural sound. "Bandits," the farmer whispered, his voice thin and raspy. "They took the cattle, and my wife." Cal's stomach dropped. He looked around. There were no tracks, not recent ones, just the churned-up earth from the panicked hooves of the stolen herd. The raiders were long gone. He heard another sound then, a soft sob coming from the shadowed entrance of the half-burned barn. Cal drew his pistol and moved toward it, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hello!" he called out, his voice a low rumble. "Is anyone in there?" The sobbing stopped. A moment of tense silence passed, broken only by the wind whistling through the ruined structure. Then a voice, small but firm, replied, "Who are you?" "My name is Cal. I'm just a cowboy passing through. I found..." I found your pa. A beat. Is he? He's alive, but he needs help. The shadow in the barn's doorway shifted. A young woman stepped into the light. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, her hair a wild tangle of auburn curls. Her dress was ripped, and a deep cut bled freely on her forearm. But her eyes, they were a striking shade of green, filled not with fear, but with a fierce, unwavering resolve. This was Mary Sullivan, and she was the anchor of this broken family. She saw the cowboy, his strong build, his serious face, and the gun in his hand. But she also saw the genuine concern in his dark eyes. She took a step closer, her gaze moving from him to her father, who was still moaning on the ground. She knew what needed to be done. Without hesitation, without a shred of coyness or false modesty, she pointed a trembling finger toward the farmhouse, toward the only part of it that still stood with its walls intact. It was her bedroom. "Cowboy," she said, her voice a mix of a plea and an order. "You've got to help me. My pa is hurt bad. You're the only one here. I need your help. We have to get him inside." She swallowed hard, her eyes locking onto his. You're going to have to help me get him inside my room." Cal, who had spent a decade running from human connection, from the touch of a woman, was now standing at a precipice. The world he had carefully built, a world of solitary trails and unspoken rules, was crumbling before his very eyes. The request, so simple and yet so profound, was a direct challenge to his carefully constructed life. The farmer's daughter, in her state of desperation, had just issued the one command he never thought he would hear. And he, a man who had never touched a woman in his life, found himself unable to turn away. He looked from her determined eyes to her father's prostrate form, and he knew his lonely journey had just come to an end. The silence that followed Mary's command was as heavy as the smoke-filled air. Cal stood, frozen, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The words, "my room," echoed in his head, a foreign and unnerving concept. It wasn't the suggestion of impropriety, it was the sheer intimacy of the request. For a man who had intentionally avoided any form of personal connection for a decade, the thought of entering a woman's private sanctuary was a jolt to his carefully maintained solitude. He watched her, this young woman with mud on her face and fire in her eyes. She wasn't looking at him as a potential lover, not even as a man. She was looking at him as a tool, a means to an end. He was the brute strength she needed, the help that had stumbled upon her at the worst possible moment. He was just a pair of hands to lift her injured father, and yet the gravity of the situation was immense. Mary, seeing his hesitation, mistook it for something else. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice laced with a weary defiance. "But there's nothing here for you, just a family in trouble. My pa needs a doctor, and the nearest one is a day's ride away. We have to stop the bleeding, or he won't make it. The door is the only way to get him out of this sun." Her words cut through his internal struggle. She wasn't asking for anything more than what was necessary. Her focus was so singular, so desperate, that it shamed his own self-absorption. The past and the reasons for his isolation didn't matter right now. A man was bleeding to death. Cal holstered his pistol and took a step toward the farmer. "All right," he said, his voice low and firm. "Let's get him up." He knelt by the old man's side, and Mary did the same. "His leg's been torn up bad," Cal noted, his eyes scanning the wound. It was deep, likely from a bullet. The farmer had a tourniquet fashioned from a torn piece of his shirt, but it was makeshift and failing. "We need to get him inside, fast," Mary said, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to retighten the makeshift bandage. Cal nodded, his jaw set. On the count of 3, he slid one arm under the farmer's shoulders, the other under his knees. Mary helped, her smaller hands finding a grip on her father's belt. Their hands brushed for a fleeting moment, and a jolt, small but unmistakable, went through Cal. It was the first time he had made such a contact in years, and it was a shock to his system. He ignored it, focusing on the weight of the man in his arms. 1, 2, 3. They lifted the farmer, who groaned in agony. Cal's muscles strained under the weight. Mary led the way, navigating the debris around the burned-out house. They reached the side door, which opened into what must have been the kitchen. It was a ruin of broken pottery and scorched wood. The only room that remained largely intact was at the far end of the house. Mary pushed the door open, revealing a small, simple bedroom. The room was filled with the scents of dried flowers, old books, and a faint, clean smell of soap. A single bed, covered with a patchwork quilt, dominated the space. On a small table, a book lay open, a half-finished cup of tea beside it. It was a woman's space, private and personal, and Cal felt like an intruder. They laid the farmer gently on the bed, his breathing ragged. Mary immediately began rummaging through a small chest of drawers, pulling out clean rags and a bottle of what looked like whiskey. "I need to clean it," she said, her voice strained, "and I need you to hold him still. He's going to struggle." Cal nodded, moving to the other side of the bed. He placed a hand on the old man's shoulder, a silent promise of support. Mary poured a generous amount of whiskey onto a cloth. The farmer's eyes fluttered open as the strong liquid hit his skin, and a pained cry escaped his lips. Cal held him firm, his presence an anchor in the stormy sea of the old man's pain. "I'm sorry, Pa," Mary whispered, her own tears beginning to fall again. Cal watched her work. She was methodical and brave, her hands moving with a practiced care that spoke of a lifetime of tending to the sick and injured. She was a woman of the land, of the West, tough, resilient, and utterly without pretense. He was struck by her competence, a stark contrast to his own helplessness in this situation. He was a cowboy, an expert in animals and open spaces, but here, in the close confines of this ruined home, he was out of his element. "Do you know how to sew?" Mary asked, her question jarring him from his thoughts. "I need to stitch this up. I can't do it alone." Cal shook his head. I've never had to," he mumbled, the truth of his words a bitter pill. He had never had anyone close enough to need such care. Mary didn't judge him. She simply looked at him with an expression that was a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "Well, you'll learn. You'll have to help me keep him steady, and then you're going to have to go for help." The thought of leaving her here, in this desolate place, surrounded by the remnants of violence, was unthinkable. He looked at the smoking remains of the house, at the endless, empty horizon. He thought of the raiders, who could return at any moment. He thought of the wife, still missing. His self-imposed exile had been shattered by a single act of violence. He wasn't a drifter anymore. He was a man standing in the middle of a family's tragedy. "I'm not leaving you here," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'll go for help, but not before I know you're safe. We need to fortify this place, and we need to find your mother." Mary stopped, a needle and thread in her hand. Her green eyes, so full of determination, now filled with a different emotion, surprise. The cowboy, who had barely spoken 10 words to her, was offering not just aid, but protection. It was an offer she couldn't refuse. And in that moment, in the close, intimate space of her room, their fates became intertwined. Cal's life of solitude was now bound to the desperate survival of the Sullivan family, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that he would never be the same again. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and violet. Inside the small bedroom, the air grew heavy, scented with blood, antiseptic, and the damp smell of burnt wood. Mary had finished stitching her father's leg, her hands surprisingly steady. Cal had been her rock, his strong hands holding the old man still as he moaned and writhed. He had followed her every instruction without question, his quiet presence a source of comfort she hadn't known she needed. With the immediate crisis averted, the adrenaline that had fueled them both began to wane, replaced by a crushing exhaustion. Mary knelt by the bed, stroking her father's feverish brow. He was sleeping now, a fitful, shallow slumber. His face was pale and his breathing was labored. "He's going to need a lot of rest," she whispered, her voice raw. Cal stood by the door, his eyes scanning the darkening landscape outside. The shadows lengthened, and the ruins of the farmhouse looked even more ominous in the failing light. "I'll stand guard," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Someone has to keep watch." "No," Mary said, her voice sharp. "You've done enough. You're just a passing stranger. You don't owe us anything. You should go." Cal turned to face her. "And what if they come back?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "What if they see the smoke and know someone's still here? You're a family of two, and one of you is unconscious. I'm not leaving you here to fend for yourselves." She looked at him, and for the first time, she saw the man behind the stoic facade. She saw the deep-set eyes, the hard lines of his face, and the vulnerability that was hidden beneath them. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, a genuine curiosity in her voice. Most men would have ridden past without a second thought. He hesitated, looking away toward the small window that faced the burned-out fields. I've seen what violence can do," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I wouldn't wish it on anyone, and I can't leave you, not like this." The words hung in the air, a hint of a deeper unspoken pain. Mary, with her keen eye for human suffering, knew there was more to his story. But she didn't press. Instead, she stood, her legs stiff from kneeling, and walked over to the small table. She poured 2 cups of water from a ceramic jug that had survived the fire and handed one to him. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now, her eyes filled with a new kind of respect. "Thank you, Cal." He took the cup, their fingers brushing again. This time, the jolt was less of a shock and more of a quiet recognition. They sat on the floor, leaning against the cold stone wall, the silence between them no longer awkward but companionable. "My mother is missing," Mary said, her voice low. "She was out in the fields when they came. I couldn't find her. I don't know if she got away." Cal felt a surge of cold dread. A lone woman in the wilderness, with bandits on the loose. The odds were against her. "We'll go look for her in the morning," he said, his tone one of quiet resolve. "We can't do anything in the dark. It's too dangerous. But we'll find her." Mary nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "I pray she's okay," she whispered, looking at the door. "She's a strong woman. She can handle herself." Cal didn't respond, but his gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his mind already formulating a plan. They had to survive the night. He would stand guard, and in the morning they would search for her mother. The thought of finding her, of bringing some semblance of peace to this shattered family, was a new and powerful motivation for him. As the night deepened, a cold wind picked up, rustling through the burned remains of the house. Mary shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Cal noticed. He took off his duster, a long, heavy coat he had worn for years, and offered it to her. "Here," he said, his voice gruff. "It's going to get cold. Take it." Mary hesitated, then took the coat. The leather was worn and smelled of horses, wood smoke, and the open road. It was warm, and she wrapped it tightly around her, feeling a strange sense of protection. It was an act of kindness so profound in its simplicity that it humbled her. This stranger, this quiet cowboy with a troubled past, was now her and her family's only hope. "I need to know your story, Cal," she said, her voice a whisper in the dark. "What happened to you? Why do you live like this?" He was silent for a long moment, the wind his only company. Then he spoke, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear him. "A long time ago, I was a different man. I was a boy. I had a family, a sister. She was beautiful and kind. I was her protector, or I was supposed to be." He paused, his hands clenching into fists. "I couldn't protect her. Bad men came. They took her. I was too young, too scared. I ran. I ran, and I never saw her again. I never told anyone. I left. I left my family. I left everything. And ever since then, I've been running." Mary was speechless. The stoic cowboy, the man who seemed as unmovable as a mountain, was just a boy who had been broken by an unimaginable trauma. She reached out, her hand a hesitant gesture. She laid her hand on his, a gesture of silent sympathy and understanding. Cal flinched at the touch, a reflex born of years of deliberate isolation. But he didn't pull away. For the first time, he let someone in, if only for a moment. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice full of genuine sorrow. "Don't be," he said, his voice hoarse. "It was my fault. I failed. And ever since then, I've been afraid to get close to anyone, afraid I'll just fail again." Mary squeezed his hand, a firm, reassuring pressure. "You didn't fail today, Cal," she said. "You saved my pa. You're helping me. You're not the boy you were then. You're a good man, Cal. A very good man." Cal didn't say anything, but he looked at her, truly looked at her, and in her eyes he saw no judgment, only compassion. He had come here, a drifter seeking to avoid all contact, and in the span of a single afternoon, he had become a protector, a healer, and a confidant. The walls he had built around himself, brick by brick, were starting to crumble. And it was all because of a farmer's daughter who had seen his strength and with a simple command had forced him to use it for good. The night was cold, but for the first time in a very long time, Cal didn't feel so alone. The first light of dawn was a soft grey, bleeding into the horizon. Cal had spent the night in a state of hyper-awareness, a sentinel against the darkness. He had sat by the doorway, his pistol resting on his knee, his eyes scanning the endless, quiet fields. He had watched as Mary had tended to her father, checking his fever, adjusting his covers. He had seen the way she held her hand on the old man's forehead, a silent, loving gesture that spoke volumes about the bond of this family. And he had felt a quiet, powerful sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. By the time the sun was a bright orange disk, the world was waking up. The birds began to chirp, a stark contrast to the previous day's violence. The air was crisp and cool. The scent of burnt wood was still heavy, but now it was mixed with the fresh scent of dew on the grass. Cal rose, his joints stiff from the night. He stretched, his muscles aching, but his mind was clear. Mary was awake too, her face still smudged with soot, but her eyes were alert. She was already at her father's side, checking his bandages. "How is he?" Cal asked, his voice low. "He's still feverish," she said, her brow furrowed with worry, "but he made it through the night." "That's a good sign," Cal nodded. "Good. We need to get some water and food. I'll go check the well. Then we go look for your mother." Mary's gaze snapped to his. "You're still here?" she asked, a note of surprise in her voice. "I said I wouldn't leave," he replied simply. "A man's word is his bond." She looked at him and a small, tired smile touched her lips. I can't thank you enough, Cal." "No need," he said, his eyes already scanning the property. "We need to move fast. Those men, they're not far, and they'll come back." He was right. Cal's knowledge of the way these things worked was born from years of riding the dangerous trails. Raiders rarely hit a place once and then rode away forever. They returned, either for what they missed or to make sure there were no witnesses left behind. The Sullivans were in mortal danger as long as they remained here. Cal went to the well. The bucket was still there, but the rope was frayed, and the well cover was splintered. He managed to pull up a bucket of water, a welcome sight. He brought it back to the house, and Mary used it to wash her face and fill her father's cup. She then offered some to Cal, who drank deeply, the cool water a balm to his dry throat. "I'll need to go for help," she said. "The nearest town is a day's ride. I can make it." "No," Cal said, his voice firm. "I'm the one who's going. You stay here. Protect your father. I'll be faster and they won't expect me. I'll get a doctor and the sheriff. And before I go, we're going to search for your mother. We'll take Ranger." Mary hesitated. The thought of being left alone, even for a moment, was terrifying, but the thought of Cal leaving was even more so. "You're a good man, Cal," she said again, a tremor in her voice. He flinched at the praise, but didn't correct her. He simply said, "Stay inside. Keep watch. Don't light a fire, no matter how cold it gets." He then began to make preparations. He filled a canteen, checked his rifle and his revolver. Mary watched him work, his movements efficient and practiced. He was a man of action, not words, and his quiet competence was a source of great comfort. He was a force of nature, a rock in the middle of her storm. Before he left, Cal took a moment to look at her father. He placed a hand on the old man's forehead, checking his temperature. "He's strong," he said. "He'll hold on." He then turned to Mary, his eyes meeting hers. "I'll be back," he said, a simple but profound promise. "I promise." The word promise hung in the air, a weight and a comfort. It was a word that held deep meaning for Cal, a man who had broken a promise to himself and his family years ago. He was making a new one, a promise to this woman he barely knew, and the weight of it was a testament to his own internal change. He mounted Ranger, the horse sensing his master's new purpose. Cal took one last look at the ruined homestead, at the woman standing in the doorway. He saw not a victim, but a survivor, a beacon of strength and resilience. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt a flicker of something he had long since forgotten: hope. He rode away from the homestead, his gaze scanning the landscape for any sign of Mary's mother or the raiders. The trail was difficult to read, the ground churned up by the herd and the bandits' horses. But he was a master tracker. He would find something. He had to. He wasn't just a cowboy on a journey anymore. He was on a mission, and his journey, for the first time in his life, wasn't about running away from his past, but riding toward a future he never thought he'd have. It was a future tied to a farmer's daughter who had, with a single command, shown him what it was like to finally feel at home. Cal rode for an hour, his eyes like a hawk, scanning the vast open land. The trail of the stolen cattle and the raiders was faint, but he was an expert tracker. He followed the churned earth, the broken branches, and the occasional hoofprint with a singular focus. He was no longer just a drifter, he was a hunter. He was hunting for the Sullivans' missing mother, and he was hunting for justice. As he rode, his mind drifted back to his own past, to the event that had shaped his life and led him to this moment. He saw her face, his sister, Sarah. She was 16, with a bright smile and eyes full of life. He was just a boy of 17, a good-for-nothing farmhand who wanted to be a man of the world. He had promised her he would protect her, that he would never let anything happen to her. But he had failed. The memory was as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. The bandits had come in the dead of night, their faces masked by shadows and their intentions hidden by the darkness. His parents had fought, but they were no match for the armed men. He had hidden, a coward, a trembling boy in the hayloft of the barn, listening to the screams, to the sound of his sister's cries. He hadn't run from the farm that night. He had been found, beaten, and left for dead. When he finally came to, the house was a ruin. His parents were gone, and his sister was nowhere to be found. He had searched for days, but there was no sign of her. The town sheriff had shaken his head, told him to move on. He had done just that, but the ghost of his sister had followed him, a constant, silent companion. He had learned to ride, to shoot, to live off the land. He had become a man who could survive anything, but he had never learned to trust or to love. He had sworn off women, seeing in their faces the ghost of his sister's terror. He had seen himself in them, a reflection of his own failure. And so he had become a loner, a man who lived on the edge of the world, afraid to touch anyone lest he bring them the same pain he had brought to his family. But Mary was different. She hadn't asked for him to save her. She had commanded it. She had seen his strength and without hesitation had demanded he use it. She hadn't seen his past, his trauma, or his fear. She had only seen the man he could be, the man he was, in that moment of crisis. And in her vulnerability, in her fierce determination, he had found a new kind of purpose. His reverie was broken by a glint of metal on the ground. He reined in Ranger and dismounted. It was a small, silver locket, tarnished and caked with mud. He picked it up, his fingers trembling. It was a woman's locket, the kind a mother would wear. He opened it, and a small, faded photograph of a young woman and a girl smiled up at him. The young woman was Mary, and the girl was a smaller version of her with the same bright eyes. He felt a pang in his chest. This was Mary's mother, and this locket, this piece of her, was a sign. She hadn't been taken far. She had fought. He remounted Ranger, his determination hardening into a cold, focused resolve. The trail of the raiders was still there, a faint scar on the earth. He would follow it, no matter how long it took, no matter where it led. He was a cowboy who had never touched a woman, but he was now on a quest for one he had never met, guided by the unspoken promise he had made to her daughter. He was no longer just a survivor of a tragic past. He was a protector of a fragile future. He would not fail again. The sun climbed higher, casting long, stark shadows across the landscape. The trail was growing colder, the hoofprints fainter. Cal knew he was losing time. He pushed Ranger harder, his mind racing. He was a lone rider against a gang of outlaws, and the odds were not in his favor. But he wasn't thinking about the odds. He was thinking about Mary. He had promised her he would return, and he would not break that promise. As he rode, the trail led him to a small hidden canyon, a place where the landscape twisted and turned, a natural labyrinth. He dismounted, leading Ranger by the reins. The air here was cooler, and the ground was rocky and uneven. He was a master of the land, but he was now in a place where the bandits could easily hide. He moved with a new kind of caution, his senses on high alert. He found it then, a small, makeshift camp, tucked away in a hidden crevice. 3 horses were tied to a post, and a small fire was smoking, a pot of coffee brewing over it. The place was a mess of empty bottles and discarded food, but there were no men. They were out, probably scouting the area, or maybe they had simply left to scout. Cal's heart pounded in his chest. They could return at any moment. He saw her then, tied to a tree, a gag in her mouth. She was an older woman, her hair streaked with grey, her face bruised and cut. Her eyes were wide with terror, but also with a fierce, defiant light. She was still fighting. She was Mary's mother. Cal's mind was a whirlwind of emotion. He was here. He had found her. And he was alone. He had to be smart. He couldn't just rush in, guns blazing. He had to think, to plan. He had to be a protector, not a hero. He quietly moved toward the horses, his movements as silent as a ghost. He took out his knife and with a few deft movements cut the horse's reins. He then took out his rifle and with a quick, decisive movement shot the horses. The shots echoed through the canyon, a loud, unnatural sound that broke the silence. The woman's eyes widened, a look of shock and disbelief on her face. He had just condemned them both to death, but he had also bought them time. The bandits, when they returned, would be on foot. He then moved toward the woman, his knife at the ready. He cut the rope that bound her and the gag that silenced her. She fell to the ground, her body trembling. Who are you?" she stammered, her voice hoarse. "My name is Cal," he said, his voice low and firm. "I'm a friend of your daughter's. We need to go. Now. The men will be back soon." He helped her to her feet. She was weak and unsteady, but she was a fighter. "Thank you," she said, her eyes full of gratitude. "My name is Eleanor. Thank you, Cal. You've saved my life." He didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the entrance to the canyon. They had to move fast. They had to get back to the farm. He had to get her back to her daughter. He had promised. They moved quickly, but Eleanor was weak. She stumbled, and Cal had to support her, his hand on her arm, a steadying presence. He felt the warmth of her skin, the fragility of her body, and a new kind of fear seized him. He was responsible for her now. He had to get her back. As they moved through the canyon, they heard the sounds of men yelling. The bandits had returned. They were enraged. Cal knew they would be coming for them, their rage a deadly force. But he was a man on a mission, a man who had made a promise. He would not fail. He led Eleanor to a small, hidden crevice, a place where they could hide and rest for a moment. He handed her his canteen, and she drank deeply. "We'll wait here," he said. "They'll be looking for us. We need to be smart." She nodded, her eyes full of trust. "You're a good man, Cal," she said. "My daughter, she was right about you." Cal flinched at the praise, but he didn't correct her. He simply looked at her, and in her eyes he saw a reflection of his own purpose. He wasn't a hero, not a savior. He was just a man who had found a reason to be a better one. He was a man who had made a promise, and he would keep it, no matter what. He had a woman to protect, a family to save, and he was a man who had finally found a reason to be more than just a ghost on the lonely trail. The journey back to the Sullivan farm was a slow, arduous one. Eleanor, weak from her ordeal and bruised from the bandits' brutal treatment, struggled to keep pace. Cal, ever the sentinel, walked by her side, his gaze constantly sweeping the horizon. He was no longer just a cowboy on a horse. He was a human shield, a guardian of a woman who was the heart of her family. As they walked, a quiet conversation began to form between them. Eleanor, with the gentle curiosity of a mother, asked him about himself. "Mary said you're a good man, Cal," she said, her voice soft. "But you seem so alone. Is there no one waiting for you?" Cal hesitated, the question a stark reminder of his self-imposed exile. "No," he said, his voice flat. "There's no one. It's just me." He didn't elaborate, but Eleanor, with a mother's intuition, knew there was more to the story. She didn't press. She simply laid a hand on his arm, a gesture of silent understanding. "Mary is a good girl," she said, changing the subject. "She's always been strong, stronger than me sometimes. When they came, I thought I'd never see her again." Her voice broke, and a tear traced a path down her bruised cheek. Cal's hand, which had been resting on the butt of his pistol, moved to pat her hand. It was an awkward, unpracticed gesture, but it was sincere. "She's waiting for you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She's been waiting." The thought of Mary, of her fierce green eyes and her unwavering resolve, filled him with a new kind of strength. He was no longer just an individual. He was part of something bigger. He was part of a family's story, a story of love, loss, and resilience. He had stumbled into it, but he had chosen to stay. The sound of hoofbeats broke the silence. Cal's hand immediately went to his rifle. He pushed Eleanor behind a large rock. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice sharp. "Don't move, no matter what." He peered over the rock, his heart pounding in his chest. 3 men on horseback, their faces grim and their guns at the ready. They were the bandits. They had found them. Cal's mind raced. He had to be fast. He had to be smart. He had one rifle, and they had three. He raised his rifle, his eye sighting the lead man. He took a deep breath and he fired. The shot echoed through the canyon, and the lead man fell from his horse, a gurgling sound escaping his lips. The other two men reined in their horses, their eyes searching for the source of the shot. Cal had an advantage. He had the high ground. He fired again, and the second man fell. The third man, a look of terror on his face, turned his horse and rode away. Cal didn't follow. He had to get Eleanor to safety. He helped Eleanor to her feet, his hands shaking slightly. "We have to go," he said, his voice strained. "We can't stop. We have to get to the farm." They moved faster now, the adrenaline giving them both a new kind of strength. Eleanor, with the courage of a mother, pushed herself to keep up. Cal, with the resolve of a man who had found a purpose, led the way. He was no longer running from his past. He was running toward a future with a family he had never known. As they neared the farm, the scent of smoke was still in the air. The sight of the half-burned house, of the broken barn, filled Eleanor with a new kind of dread. "My husband," she whispered, her voice full of fear. Is he okay?" "He's alive," Cal said, his voice a comfort. "Mary's with him. She stitched him up. She's a good daughter, Eleanor." The words seemed to calm her. She looked at him, and a small, grateful smile touched her lips. "Yes," she said, "she is." They finally reached the house. Mary was standing at the doorway, her face pale with worry. When she saw her mother, her face broke into a relieved sob. She rushed forward, her arms enveloping her mother in a tight hug. "Mama!" she cried, her voice full of emotion. "You're okay! Oh, thank God you're okay!" Eleanor held her daughter, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Cal stood back, a silent witness to the reunion. He felt a lump form in his throat, a strange and unfamiliar emotion. He was a man who had never been part of a family, and now he was a part of this one. He had brought a mother back to her daughter, a wife back to her husband. He had done a good thing, a thing he had always been afraid he couldn't do. He looked at Mary, and she looked back at him, her green eyes full of gratitude and a new, powerful emotion he couldn't quite name. In that moment, he knew he wasn't leaving. He wasn't a drifter anymore. He was a protector. He was a part of this family, and he would do anything to keep them safe. The following days were a blur of work and quiet contemplation. Cal, a man who had once shunned all responsibility, found himself shouldering the weight of the Sullivan family. He was their protector, their provider, their anchor in a world that had suddenly become hostile. He spent his days mending fences, repairing the broken barn, and scouting the surrounding land for any sign of the remaining bandit. He was methodical, efficient, and tireless. He was a cowboy, and he knew how to work. He was a master of the land, and he used that knowledge to protect the family. Mary, for her part, was a silent partner in his efforts. She tended to her father, who was slowly recovering, his fever finally breaking. She cooked meals for Cal, her hands moving with a practiced grace that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. She was a woman of the land, and she knew how to survive. Their relationship, once a matter of a simple command, had evolved into a silent partnership. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. They communicated through a series of nods, glances, and a shared understanding of the gravity of their situation. He would see her worried face as she looked out into the fields, and he would nod, a silent promise that he was keeping watch. She would bring him a plate of food, and he would eat it, a silent thank you for her care. One evening, as the sun set, Cal was working on the barn. The sound of a hammer hitting wood was a constant rhythm. He felt a presence behind him and turned to see Mary standing there, a cup of coffee in her hands. She handed it to him, and he took it, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting moment. He didn't flinch this time. "You don't have to do all this, Cal," she said, her voice soft. "You've done so much already." "I know," he said, taking a sip of the warm coffee. "But I want to." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Why are you staying?" Cal was silent for a long moment, the scent of coffee filling the air. He looked at the barn, at the work he had done, at the home he was helping to rebuild. He thought of the past, of the boy who had run away, of the man who had been a ghost. And he thought of the present, of this family, of this woman who had, with a single command, given him a reason to live again. "Because," he said, his voice low and firm, "because you need me, and because I need you." The words hung in the air, a confession, a revelation. Mary's eyes widened. She had never expected to hear those words from him, from this stoic, silent cowboy. He wasn't just staying out of a sense of duty. He was staying because he wanted to, because he had found a home, a purpose, a family. "I don't know what to say, Cal," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You don't have to say anything," he said, taking another sip of coffee. Just let me stay. Let me help. I need this." She nodded, a silent tear tracing a path down her cheek. She didn't say anything, but her eyes, filled with a new kind of gratitude and a quiet, blossoming affection, spoke for her. She had a man she had never met, who was now her protector. He had found a family he had never known, and he was now their guardian. The night was cool, but the air between them was warm with a new kind of understanding. Cal finished his coffee and went back to work. Mary went back to the house, a small smile on her face. They were no longer just a cowboy and a farmer's daughter. They were partners, their lives intertwined, their futures bound together by a single act of violence and a single act of quiet, unyielding love. The barn, once a ruin, was slowly being rebuilt, a testament to the new life that was slowly but surely beginning to take root in the heart of this broken land. The months that followed were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the quiet strength of the bond that had formed between Cal and the Sullivan family. The seasons changed, the fields turned from brown to green, and the farm slowly began to recover from the attack. The scent of new life replaced the acrid smell of smoke and ruin. Cal, once a man of the open road, was now a man of the land. He had a schedule, a routine. He woke with the sun, worked all day, and slept under the same roof every night. He had a family, a purpose, a home. He was no longer a ghost. He was a presence. He had taken on the role of the man of the house, not in a demanding way, but in a quiet, protective one. He spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. He had become a father figure to Mary's younger sister, Sarah, a quiet, timid girl who had been traumatized by the attack. He would teach her how to shoot, how to ride, how to be strong. He would tell her stories of the land, of the mountains and the rivers, of the animals and the stars. He would look at her, and he would see a reflection of his own lost sister, and he would feel a new kind of love, a new kind of purpose. Mary, for her part, was a beacon of light in his life. She was a woman of strength and grace, a woman who could mend a wound and cook a meal, a woman who could laugh and cry, a woman who could heal. She had shown him that love was not a weakness, but a strength, a force that could heal the deepest wounds. She had shown him that he was not a failure, but a survivor, a man who could protect and love. One evening, as the sun set, they were sitting on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. The air was cool and crisp, and the sound of crickets filled the night. Mary leaned her head on his shoulder, a silent gesture of comfort and trust. Cal, a man who had never touched a woman, felt a sense of peace he had never known. He put his arm around her, a slow, hesitant gesture. She didn't flinch. She simply leaned closer. "Cal," she said, her voice a soft whisper, "what are we going to do? What happens now?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the endless sky. He thought of the past, of the boy who had run away, of the man who had been a ghost. He thought of the present, of this woman, of this family, of this home, and he knew what he had to do. "We stay," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "We stay here, we rebuild, we make this a home, and we have a life." Mary lifted her head and looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice a tremor. "This is a big step, Cal." "I know," he said, "but I've been running for too long. It's time to stop. It's time to build, with you, with your family." She smiled, a beautiful, radiant smile that lit up her face. "I would like that," she said, her voice a whisper. "Very much." He leaned in, and he kissed her. It was a slow, tentative kiss, a kiss born not of passion, but of love, of trust, of a new beginning. It was the first time he had ever kissed a woman, and it was the best thing he had ever done. The past, with its ghosts and its demons, was finally gone. He was a new man, a man with a future, a man with a home, a man with a love he had never known. He was no longer a cowboy who had never touched a woman. He was a man who had found his purpose, his love, his life, with a farmer's daughter who had, with a single command, opened his heart and his world. The seeds of a new life had been planted, and they were finally beginning to grow. The months that followed were a testament to the quiet life Cal had built with the Sullivan family. The farm was no longer a symbol of ruin, but a testament to their shared resilience. The burned-out shell of the farmhouse had been transformed into a functional home, a cozy place, filled with the smell of baked bread and the warmth of a crackling fire. The barn was fully rebuilt, its wooden walls strong and new, a safe haven for the small herd of cattle they had managed to acquire. Cal had settled into a rhythm he never thought possible. His days were a comfortable cycle of hard work and quiet companionship. He would wake with the sun, his body now accustomed to the feel of a soft bed instead of the hard ground. He would work on the farm, his hands, once calloused from a lifetime of holding reins and ropes, now calloused from mending fences and planting crops. He had a purpose, a reason to be. And that reason was Mary. Their relationship had blossomed into a beautiful, quiet love. It was not a love born of grand gestures or passionate declarations, but a love built on a foundation of shared struggle and quiet understanding. They communicated with a simple glance, a shared smile, a gentle touch. He had learned to read her emotions in the subtle shifts of her green eyes, and she had learned to read his in the quiet strength of his presence. Mary's father, a strong and resilient man, had made a full recovery. He was a quiet observer, a man of few words, but his eyes were filled with a deep gratitude for the cowboy who had saved his family. He had seen the change in Cal, the way the man had gone from a haunted drifter to a settled and content man. He knew that Cal was the best thing that had ever happened to his family, and he was proud to call him a son. Eleanor, a woman who had seen the worst of humanity, had found a new kind of peace. She was a gracious and kind woman, and she treated Cal as if he were her own son. She would cook his favorite meals, mend his clothes, and listen to his quiet stories of the open road. She was a mother to him, a woman who had healed the wounds of his past with her gentle kindness, and Sarah, the timid little sister, had blossomed under his care. She was no longer afraid of the dark, no longer afraid of strangers. She would follow him around the farm, her small hand in his, her eyes filled with a childlike adoration. He would teach her how to ride, how to fish, how to find her way in the wilderness. He had become a father to her, a protector, a guide. Their quiet life was a balm to Cal's soul. He had never known such peace, such happiness. The past, with its ghosts and its demons, felt 1,000,000 miles away. He was a new man, a man with a purpose, a man with a family. He had found a home, a love, a life he had never thought possible. But the calm was not meant to last. One day, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. He rode with a grim, practiced silence, his gaze fixed on the Sullivan farm. He was a man with a purpose, a man with a grudge. He was the third bandit, the one who had escaped Cal's rifle fire months ago. He had returned, not for the cattle, but for revenge. He had spent months tracking Cal, asking questions in saloons, listening to the whispers of cowboys and drifters. He had heard the stories of the cowboy who had saved a family, of the man who had shot 2 of his friends and left them to rot in a canyon. He had seen the charred remains of the farm, and he had waited. He had waited for the right moment to strike. Cal, with the instincts of a man who had lived a lifetime on the edge, felt the change in the air. He felt the tension, the unspoken fear. He saw the way Ranger, his horse, was acting up, its ears twitching, its body tense. He knew something was wrong. He knew the past was coming back to haunt him. He was in the barn, mending a saddle, when he saw the rider. He stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw the man's face, a face filled with a cold, unforgiving rage. He knew this man was here for him, for his family. He knew the calm was about to be shattered, and the storm was about to begin. He walked out of the barn, his gaze fixed on the rider. He didn't have his rifle, his pistol. He was a man of peace now, a man of the farm. But the past was a shadow that followed him, and he knew he had to face it, not as a cowboy on the run, but as a man with a home, a man with a family to protect. "Go inside, Mary," he said, his voice low and firm. "Take your sister and your ma. Lock the doors. Don't come out." Mary, who had been watching from the doorway of the house, knew what he was talking about. She had seen the rider, too. She had seen the look on his face, a look she had seen before. It was the look of a man who had come for blood. "Cal," she said, her voice a plea. "No, don't do this." "I have to," he said, his eyes fixed on hers. "He's here for me. He's here for what I did. I have to face him. I have to protect you." He took a step toward her, his hand reaching for her. She took his hand, her fingers interlaced with his. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not fear, but love. She knew who he was, what he had done, and she still loved him. "Be careful," she said, her voice a whisper. "Please, come back to me." "I will," he said, his voice firm. "I promise." He released her hand and walked toward the rider. He was a man who had never touched a woman, and now he was a man who was fighting for the one he loved. He was a man who had once run from his past, and now he was a man who was fighting for his future. The calm was over, and the storm was about to begin. The rider stopped his horse 100 feet from the farmhouse, his silhouette a dark, menacing shape against the setting sun. He dismounted with a slow, deliberate grace, his hands moving to the revolvers on his hips. He was a man of medium height, but his presence was immense, a palpable force of cold, focused rage. His face was a grim mask, his eyes like chips of obsidian, and a long, angry scar ran from his temple to his jawline, a testament to a life of violence. "Cal Stone," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I've been looking for you." Cal stood his ground, his hands at his sides. He was a man of peace, but his body was coiled with a primal, protective tension. "I don't know who you are," he said, his voice calm and steady, "and I don't want any trouble." "Don't lie," the man sneered, taking a step forward. "You're the cowboy who shot my brothers. You're the man who left them to rot in that canyon. I'm here for what's mine. I'm here for revenge." Cal's eyes flickered to the house, to the window where he knew Mary was watching. "They came here for blood," he said, his voice low. "They took what wasn't theirs. They hurt her family. They got what they deserved." The man laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "They were my family," he said, his voice rising in anger. "They were my brothers, and now I'm going to make you pay. You and your new family." A cold dread seized Cal. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the Sullivans. This was about Mary, Eleanor, and Sarah. He had brought this on them. He had to end it. "Don't bring them into this," Cal said, his voice a low growl. "This is between you and me. Let them go, and I'll give you what you want." The man's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "No," he said, his eyes filled with a cold, malevolent light. "This is about all of you. It's about a life for a life. You took my family. I'm going to take yours." Cal's hand, which had been at his side, moved to his hip, but he was unarmed. He had left his pistol and rifle inside. He was a man of peace, but he was facing a man of war. He was a man of the farm, but he was facing a man of the gun. "I don't have a gun," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Let's talk about this. We can settle this without violence." The man laughed again, a sound of pure mockery. "No," he said, "there's only one way this ends. You die, and your family watches." He drew his revolver, a large, menacing weapon. Cal's heart pounded in his chest. He was a good fighter, a man of strength and skill, but he was no match for a gun. He had to be smart. He had to be fast. He had to use his wits. He took a step back, his eyes fixed on the man's hands. He had to wait for the right moment, the right opportunity. He had to get to the house. He had to get his gun. He had to protect his family. "You're a dead man, Stone," the bandit said, his finger on the trigger. "You should have stayed a loner. You should have stayed away from families. They just get you killed." The words hit Cal like a physical blow. He thought of his sister, of his past, of the reason he had run. The bandit was right. He had brought this on himself. He had opened his heart, and now he was going to pay the price. But then he thought of Mary, of her smile, of her eyes filled with love. He thought of Eleanor, of her kindness, of her gratitude. He thought of Sarah, of her hand in his, of her innocent trust. He wasn't a loner anymore. He was a man with a family, and a man with a family was a man with a reason to fight. He lunged forward, his body moving with a speed and a grace born of a lifetime of fighting. The bandit, caught off guard, stumbled back. Cal's hands went for the man's gun, a desperate last-ditch effort. The bandit pulled the trigger, and a shot rang out, the sound echoing through the quiet fields. The bullet whizzed past Cal's head, a hair's breadth from its mark. He grabbed the man's arm, his muscles straining. He was a strong man, a man of the land, and he had the advantage of surprise. He twisted the man's arm, and the gun fell to the ground. The two men were now in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. They grappled, their bodies a tangle of muscle and bone. They were two forces of nature, a man of the gun and a man of the land. The bandit, fueled by a cold, unforgiving rage, fought with a primal ferocity. Cal, fueled by a deep protective love, fought with a quiet, unwavering strength. The bandit landed a blow to Cal's jaw, a sharp, blinding pain. Cal stumbled back, his head swimming. The bandit moved in, his hands like claws, his eyes filled with a murderous intent. He was going to kill Cal. He was going to make him pay. But then a voice he had come to love, screamed his name. "Cal!" Mary's voice, a sound of pure terror, cut through the fight. The bandit, distracted, turned his head toward the sound. It was the only opening Cal needed. He moved with a speed and a grace he didn't know he possessed. He delivered a crushing blow to the man's jaw, a blow that sent him reeling back. The bandit fell to the ground, his body a twisted mess. He was unconscious. Cal stood over him, his chest heaving, his body aching. He looked at the house, at the front door where Mary was standing, her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. He had done it. He had saved them. He had faced his past, and he had won. He walked over to the bandit, his body a silent sentinel. He took the man's gun, his hands trembling. He had never killed a man in cold blood. But this man was a threat. He was a threat to his family, to his home, to his future. He had to do it. He had to end it. He raised the gun, his hand shaking, his finger on the trigger. He looked at the man's unconscious face, a face filled with a cold, malevolent hatred. He knew what he had to do. Cal stood over the unconscious bandit, the cold weight of the revolver in his hand. The setting sun cast a long shadow over the scene, a grim tableau of violence and its consequences. He was a man who had left a past of pain behind, only to find it had followed him, biding its time. Now he held the power to end it, to cut the last thread connecting him to the life he had once fled. He thought of the things this man and his ilk had done. The burned-out farm, the stolen cattle, the terror inflicted on a peaceful family. He thought of the two men he had left for dead, their bodies a stark reminder of the brutality of this world, and he thought of the man lying at his feet, a man who had sworn to take the lives of the people Cal had come to love. Vengeance was a simple, logical path. It was the way of the West, a life for a life, a debt to be paid in blood. But then he looked up at the farmhouse. Mary was no longer standing in the doorway. She was on the porch, her hands no longer over her mouth, but held tightly together as if in prayer. Her father and mother stood behind her, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and hope. He saw Sarah, her small, frightened face peeking from a window. He saw the family he had fought so hard to protect, a family that had shown him a different way, a different path. He thought of Mary's words. "You're a good man, Cal, a very good man." He thought of Eleanor's kindness, of the way she had tended to him. He thought of the way Sarah's hand fit so perfectly in his. They hadn't seen him as a killer, a drifter, a man of violence. They had seen him as a protector, a healer, a man of peace. He had a choice to make. He could be the man of the past, a man of violence and revenge. He could pull the trigger and end this threat, this chapter of his life, with a single, final act of brutality. Or he could be the man of the future, the man they had come to know. He could be a man of peace, a man who had chosen a different path. He looked at the bandit, at the scar on his face, at the cold hatred that was etched on his features. This man was a product of the world Cal had once inhabited, a world of violence, of fear, of a life lived on the edge. But Cal was no longer that man. He had a home now. He had a family. He had something to fight for, but he also had something to live for. He lowered the gun. The weight of it, once a comfort, now felt like a curse. He took a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. He looked at the house again, and he saw Mary, her face a mask of relief. She had seen his choice. She had seen the man he had become. He walked over to his horse, Ranger, who stood patiently nearby. He took a coil of rope from his saddle and returned to the unconscious bandit. He tied the man's hands and feet, his movements methodical and firm. He then dragged the man, his body a dead weight, and tied him to a post near the well. He would be there for the sheriff to find in the morning. He would be a prisoner of justice, not a victim of revenge. He walked back to the house, his steps slow and heavy. He was a man who had just faced down a demon from his past, and he was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. He reached the porch, and Mary was there, her arms open. She didn't say anything. She just held him, her body a soft, warm comfort against his tired frame. He held her, his arms wrapped tightly around her. He was a man who had never touched a woman, and now he was holding the one he loved. He was a man who had run from his past, and now he was embracing his future. He had a home, he had a family, and he had a love that had shown him the true meaning of strength. The night was quiet now, the only sound the gentle rustling of the leaves in the wind. The world was at peace, and for the first time in a very long time, so was Cal. He had chosen a new path, a new life. He had chosen to be a man of peace, a man of love, a man of the land. He had chosen to be the man Mary had always believed him to be. And in her arms, he knew he had made the right choice. He was finally, truly, home. The morning sun brought with it a sense of quiet normalcy, a stark contrast to the night's events. The farmhouse was alive with the gentle sounds of a family waking up. Mary was in the kitchen making coffee. Eleanor was tending to the chickens, and Cal was sitting on the porch, his rifle resting on his lap, his eyes fixed on the bandit tied to the post. He was a prisoner now, his face a grim mask of defeat and rage. He had tried to kill Cal. He had tried to destroy his family, and he had failed. He was a ghost of a past that Cal had finally laid to rest. A cloud of dust on the horizon announced the arrival of the sheriff. He was a large, imposing man with a kind face and a no-nonsense demeanor. He rode into the yard, his gaze sweeping over the scene. He saw the unconscious bandit, the bullet holes in the ground, and the grim, determined look on Cal's face. "What happened here, son?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Cal looked at him, his gaze steady. "He came for revenge," he said, his voice flat. "He's the third man, the one who got away." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. He walked over to the bandit, his hand going to his pistol. He nudged the man with his boot, and the bandit groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at Cal, and a look of cold hatred passed over his face. "He came here to kill me," Cal said, his voice low, "and to kill this family." The sheriff nodded. "I see that," he said, his voice a quiet authority. "You did the right thing, son. You didn't kill him. You brought him to justice." Cal didn't respond. He simply looked at the bandit, a look of quiet resolve on his face. He had made a choice. He had chosen a new path, a path of peace and justice. He had chosen to be a man of the land, not a man of the gun. Mary came out of the house, a cup of coffee in her hands. She handed it to the sheriff, her face a mask of quiet gratitude. "Thank you for coming, Sheriff," she said, her voice soft. We were afraid." The sheriff took the coffee, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "It's my job, ma'am," he said, his voice a gentle comfort. "And you have a good man here, a very good man." He looked at Cal, a look of respect in his eyes. "You're a good man, Cal, a very good man." Cal flinched at the praise, a familiar reaction, but this time it was different. He didn't feel like a fraud. He felt like a man who had earned it. He had faced his past, and he had won. The sheriff and his deputies took the bandit away. The man was a prisoner now, a man who would face a trial, a man who would be brought to justice. He was no longer a threat. He was just a man who had made a bad choice, a man who had chosen a path of violence and revenge. The farm was quiet now. The sun was warm on their faces. The air was filled with the gentle scent of new life. The storm was over, and the calm had returned. But this time, it was different. This time, it was a calm born not of avoidance, but of a quiet, hard-won peace. Cal stood there, a silent sentinel, his eyes on the horizon. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man with a home, a man with a family. He was a man who had faced his past and had chosen a better future. He was a man who had finally found his place in the world. And that place was right here, with Mary and her family. The incident with the bandit left a quiet but lasting mark on the Sullivan household. The sense of security they had so carefully built was momentarily shattered, a chilling reminder that the world was still a dangerous place. But it also solidified their bond. They had faced a threat together and had emerged stronger for it. For Cal, the confrontation was more than just a fight. It was a final exorcism of his past. The sight of the bandit tied to the post, helpless and defeated, was a stark contrast to the memory of his own helplessness as a boy. He had not run this time. He had stood his ground, not just for himself, but for the people he loved. But the scars of the past were not just emotional. The physical toll of the fight was a constant reminder. He had a large, angry bruise on his jaw where the bandit had struck him. Mary, with her gentle hands, tended to it, her touch a balm to his aching body. As she applied a warm compress, her fingers brushed against his skin, and he flinched, a reflex born of a lifetime of avoiding intimacy. She noticed it immediately. She stopped, her green eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "Does it still hurt?" she asked, her voice soft. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's not that." She waited, her gaze unwavering. She had learned to be patient with him, to give him the space he needed to talk. He took a deep breath, the words a bitter pill in his mouth. I'm sorry," he said. I've never been touched like that. I'm not used to it." Mary's face softened. "Cal," she said, her voice full of a deep, profound tenderness, "you don't have to be sorry. You've been through so much, I understand." She took his hand, her fingers interlaced with his. "It's okay. We can take our time. We have all the time in the world." Her words were a comfort, a quiet promise of a future filled with patience and love. She didn't push him. She didn't demand anything from him. She simply loved him for who he was, a man with a broken past and a future full of promise. As the days turned into weeks, the farm settled back into its comfortable rhythm. The sun was warm, the crops were growing, and the animals were thriving. The quiet calm had returned, but this time it was different. It was a calm that was earned, a peace that was won. Cal and Mary's love deepened, a quiet, profound force that was as strong as the roots of the trees in their yard. They were two broken people who had found a way to heal each other. They were two lonely souls who had found a home in each other's arms. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear, Cal spoke of his past again. He told her the whole story, the story of his sister, of his failure, of the guilt that had haunted him for a decade. He spoke of the boy who had run away, of the man who had become a ghost. He spoke of the fear that had held him captive for so long. Mary listened, her hand in his. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She just listened, her presence a silent comfort. When he was done, she didn't say anything for a long moment. She simply squeezed his hand. "Cal," she said, her voice a soft whisper, "that wasn't your fault. You were just a boy. You did what you had to do to survive. And you've done so much since then. You've saved my family. You've given us a new life. You're not the boy you were then. You're a man of courage and honor. You're a hero, Cal." Her words were a balm to his soul, a healing force that began to mend the deepest wounds of his past. He looked at her, and in her eyes he saw a reflection of the man he had become, a man of courage, a man of honor, a man of love. He leaned in, and he kissed her. It was a kiss born not of passion, but of a deep, profound love. It was a kiss that sealed a new chapter in their lives, a chapter of healing, of forgiveness, of a new beginning. He was no longer a man with a broken past. He was a man with a future, and that future was with her, with this family, with this life he had finally found. With the threat of the bandits finally gone, a new kind of challenge emerged for Cal and the Sullivans, the challenge of a new beginning. The farm, once a symbol of their hardship, was now a canvas for their dreams. Cal, with his quiet strength and boundless energy, became the driving force behind the transformation. He and Mary worked side by side, their movements a synchronized dance of shared purpose. He would plow the fields, and she would sow the seeds. He would mend the fences, and she would whitewash the walls. They were two parts of a whole, a team united by love and a shared vision of a better future. Cal, with his cowboy instincts, had an uncanny ability to read the land. He knew where to find water, where to plant crops, where to build a new barn. He was no longer a drifter, a man who lived on the surface of the world. He was a man with roots, a man who was deeply connected to the land he was helping to cultivate. Mary, with her sharp mind and practical spirit, was the mastermind behind their new venture. She kept the books, managed the household, and planned for the future. She was a woman of the land, a woman of the West, a woman who could not only survive, but thrive. Their love story, once a quiet, private affair, began to blossom in the open. They were no longer afraid to show their affection, to share a gentle touch, a quiet glance, a shared laugh. They were a couple, a family, a unit. They were a testament to the fact that love could flourish in the most unexpected of places. Cal's relationship with Eleanor and her husband grew into a deep, mutual respect. They saw him not as a hired hand, but as a son, a man who had not only saved their family, but had also given them a new kind of hope. They had been broken, but now they were whole again. And it was all because of the quiet, stoic cowboy who had stumbled into their lives. Sarah, the timid little sister, had completely come out of her shell. She would follow Cal around the farm, a small shadow of a girl with a big heart. He taught her how to ride, how to fish, how to hunt. He taught her to be brave, to be strong, to be fearless. He had become the protector she had always needed, the brother she had never had. The town, once a place of whispers and rumors about the quiet cowboy, was now a place of respect and admiration. The sheriff had spread the word of Cal's courage, of his choice to not kill the bandit, but to bring him to justice. He was no longer the cowboy who had never touched a woman. He was a man of honor, a man of peace, a man who had chosen a better way. Their life was not without its challenges. There were droughts, floods, and the constant struggle of farm life. But they faced them together, their shared resolve a constant source of strength. They were a family, and they were building a new life, a life built on a foundation of love, trust, and a deep, abiding respect for each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear, Mary looked at him, her eyes shining with a quiet, profound love. "Cal," she said, her voice a soft whisper, This is what I always wanted. A home, a family, a life with someone I love." Cal looked at her, and his heart, which had been a barren wasteland for so long, felt full, overflowing with a quiet, powerful love. "Me too," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Me too." He took her hand, his fingers interlaced with hers. He was no longer a man on the run. He was a man with a home, a man with a family, a man with a future. He was a man who had finally found his place in the world, and that place was right here, with her, with this family, with this life he had finally found. He had come here, a cowboy with a broken past, and he had found a new frontier, a new life, a new kind of love. The passage of time was a gentle current, carrying Cal and Mary forward into a future they were building with their own hands. The farm was a testament to their love, a place where their shared dreams were taking root and flourishing. The days were filled with hard work and quiet joy, and the nights were filled with the soft sounds of a family at peace. Cal, now fully integrated into the Sullivan family, felt a sense of belonging he had never known. He was a son, a brother, a partner. He was a man who had found his place in the world. But there was one final step to take, one final promise to make. He wanted to make Mary his wife, to make their shared life a legal and formal commitment. He was a man of action, not words. He wasn't a poet, a romantic. He was a cowboy, a man of the land. He knew how to build a fence, how to plow a field, how to protect a family. But he didn't know how to propose to the woman he loved. He struggled with the words, the gestures, the traditions. He wanted it to be perfect, a moment she would cherish forever. He sought the advice of Eleanor and her husband, a quiet conversation over a cup of coffee. He confessed his fears, his insecurities, his hopes. They listened, their faces a mask of quiet understanding. They had seen the love between him and their daughter, and they knew it was a love that was meant to be. "Just be yourself, Cal," Eleanor said, her voice soft. "Mary loves you for who you are. She doesn't need grand gestures. She just needs you, and she needs to know you'll be there always." He nodded, the words a comfort. He knew she was right. Mary was a woman of substance, a woman who valued honesty and authenticity more than anything else. He didn't need to be someone he wasn't. He just needed to be Cal. He decided to do it that night, under the endless star-filled sky. He took her for a walk to the top of a small hill, a place where they often went to watch the sunset. The air was cool and crisp, and the stars were like a million diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth. It was a moment of quiet, peaceful beauty, a moment that felt right. He stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned to face her, his hands trembling slightly. She looked at him, her green eyes filled with a quiet, expectant light. She knew. She had known all along. "Mary," he said, his voice a low, unsteady rumble, I'm not a man of many words. You know that. I've never been good at this, but I love you. I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life." He took her hands, his fingers interlaced with hers. You saved me. You gave me a home. You gave me a family. You gave me a reason to live. And I want to give you a reason to live too. I want to be your husband. I want to be a part of your life. I want to be a part of your family. I want to marry you." He hadn't planned to say so much. The words had just poured out, a torrent of emotion he had held in for so long. He was a man who had never been able to express his feelings, and now he was laying his heart on the line, a raw and vulnerable offering. Mary's eyes filled with tears, her face a mask of love and relief. "Oh, Cal," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, 1,000 times yes." She wrapped her arms around him and she kissed him. It was a kiss born not of passion, but of a deep, profound love. A kiss that sealed a promise. A kiss that marked a new beginning. He held her, his arms wrapped tightly around her. He was a man who had never touched a woman, and now he was holding the one he loved, the one who had made him whole. They stood there for a long time, under the endless sky, their bodies a single, loving silhouette. They were two broken souls who had found a way to heal each other, two lonely hearts who had found a home in each other's arms. The stars were their witness, the land was their testament, and their love was there forever. The news of the engagement spread through the small community like wildfire, a source of quiet joy in a world often marked by hardship. The Sullivans, a family once ostracized by their tragedy, were now a symbol of hope and resilience. And Cal, the quiet cowboy who had once been a mystery, was now a beloved member of the community. The wedding was a simple affair, a small celebration held in the heart of the farm. The barn, rebuilt with Cal's own hands, was decorated with wildflowers and lanterns. The guests were a small group of family and close friends, the people who had stood by them through thick and thin. The air was filled with the scent of fresh-baked bread, roasted meats, and the sweet perfume of new life. Cal, in a clean new suit, was a far cry from the dusty drifter who had first stumbled upon the farm. He stood by the makeshift altar, his heart pounding in his chest. He was a man who had spent a lifetime running from human connection, and now he was about to make the most profound connection of all. He was a man who had never touched a woman, and now he was about to marry the one he loved. Mary, in a simple white dress she had made herself, was a vision of quiet, understated beauty. She walked down the aisle, her hand in her father's, her eyes fixed on Cal. She was a woman of the land, a woman of the West, a woman of strength and grace. She was a woman who had seen the worst of humanity and had still chosen to love. The ceremony was short, simple, and filled with a deep, profound love. The local preacher, a kind old man with a gentle face, spoke of love, of family, of a new beginning. He spoke of the two broken souls who had found a way to heal each other, of the two lonely hearts who had found a home in each other's arms. When it was time for the vows, Cal looked at Mary, his heart overflowing with a quiet, powerful love. He didn't have a grand speech, a flowery poem. He simply spoke from his heart, his voice a low, unsteady rumble. "Mary," he said, "I promise to love you. I promise to protect you. I promise to be here always. I'll be your home, your family, your friend. I'll be your husband, and I'll be yours forever." Mary's eyes filled with tears. She took his hands, her fingers interlaced with his. "Cal," she said, her voice a soft whisper, "I promise to love you. I promise to be your home, your family, your friend. I promise to be your wife, and I'll be yours forever." The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Cal leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of a deep, profound love, a kiss that sealed their vows, a kiss that marked a new beginning. He held her, his arms wrapped tightly around her. He was a man who had never touched a woman, and now he was holding his wife. He was a man who had run from his past, and now he was embracing his future. He was a man who had finally found his place in the world. The celebration that followed was a joyous one. The guests ate and drank, and they danced under the endless star-filled sky. Cal, a man who had never danced, found himself in Mary's arms, his body moving to the rhythm of her heart. He was a man who had spent a lifetime alone, and now he was surrounded by love, by family, by a life he had never thought possible. As the night wore on, he looked at Mary, her face a radiant mask of love and happiness. He had come here, a cowboy with a broken past, and he had found a new life, a new frontier, a new kind of love. He had found a home, a family, a wife. He was no longer a drifter, a loner, a ghost. He was a husband, a son, a brother. He was a man who had finally found his purpose, his love, his life. The wedding was a beautiful beginning, but it was just that, a beginning. The real work of building a life together had just begun. Cal and Mary, now husband and wife, settled into a rhythm of shared purpose, their days a testament to their love and their shared dreams. They were a force to be reckoned with, a team united by love and a deep, abiding respect for each other. Cal, with his quiet strength and boundless energy, was the rock of the family. He worked from sunup to sundown, his hands a constant testament to his love for the land and the people who lived on it. He was a man who had finally found his calling, his purpose, his home. Mary, with her sharp mind and practical spirit, was the heart of the family. She managed the household, tended to her parents, and nurtured her younger sister. She was a woman of substance, a woman who could not only survive, but thrive. She was a woman who had chosen to love a broken man and had, in turn, been made whole. Their love story was a quiet, profound one. It was a love built on a foundation of shared struggle, of quiet understanding, of a deep, abiding respect for each other. They didn't need grand gestures or passionate declarations. They communicated with a simple glance, a shared smile, a gentle touch. They were two parts of a whole, two souls who had found a home in each other's arms. The community, once a place of whispers and rumors, was now a place of respect and admiration. Cal was a beloved member of the community, a man who had earned their trust with his actions, not with his words. He was a man who had chosen a path of peace and justice, a man who had shown them that a new life was possible, even in the most difficult of circumstances. As the seasons changed, so did their lives. They had a child, a son, a boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's bright green eyes. They named him Caleb, a name that spoke of a new beginning, a new chapter, a new life. Cal, a man who had never touched a woman, was now a father, a man who held his son in his arms, his heart overflowing with a quiet, powerful love. He was a man who had run from his past, and now he was embracing his future, a future filled with love, with family, with a life he had never thought possible. The farm was a testament to their love, a place where their dreams had taken root and flourished. It was a place where a cowboy with a broken past had found a new frontier, a new life, a new kind of love. It was a place where a farmer's daughter had shown him the true meaning of strength, of courage, of a deep, abiding love. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching their son play in the grass, Mary leaned her head on his shoulder. "Cal," she said, her voice a soft whisper. This is everything I ever wanted, a home, a family, a life with you." Cal wrapped his arm around her, his gaze fixed on their son. "Me too," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Me too." He was a man who had once been a ghost, a man who had been defined by absence. But now he was a man of presence, a man of purpose, a man of love. He was a husband, a father, a son. He was a man who had finally found his place in the world. And that place was right here, with her, with their son, with this life he had finally found. The years flowed by like a gentle river, etching lines of contentment on Cal and Mary's faces. Their son, Caleb, grew into a sturdy, bright boy, with his father's quiet strength and his mother's vivid green eyes. He was the living embodiment of their love, a testament to the life they had built from the ashes of a tragedy. The Sullivan farm, now a prosperous and bustling homestead, was a true haven, a place of peace and industry. The community, once suspicious of the lone cowboy, now looked to him as a pillar of strength and a symbol of resilience. He was a father, a husband, a son, and a trusted friend, a man who had finally found his place in the world. But the world of the Old West was a place of constant change, and whispers of a new kind of threat began to drift on the wind. The whispers spoke of a railroad, a great iron snake that was planned to cut through the very heart of their valley. For the Sullivans and their neighbors, the railroad was a double-edged sword. It promised a connection to the wider world, a way to transport their goods to market and bring in new supplies. But it also threatened to shatter the quiet, peaceful life they had so carefully cultivated. The surveyors arrived first, a small group of men in strange city clothes, their faces pale and their hands soft. They were an alien presence in the wild, rugged landscape. They spoke of progress, of modernity, of a future that seemed to have no place for men who worked the land with their hands. Cal watched them with a quiet suspicion. He had seen what progress could do. It could change a place, a people, a way of life. It could bring with it a new kind of violence, a new kind of greed. The railroad company's representatives followed, slick men in expensive suits with an easy smile and a cold glint in their eyes. They offered the farmers a pittance for their land, a price far below its true value. They spoke of eminent domain, of legal rights, of a future that would leave them behind if they didn't comply. They were not bandits with guns, but they were no less dangerous. They were a new kind of predator, one that used words and legal documents instead of bullets. The Sullivans and their neighbors were divided. Some saw the railroad as an opportunity, a chance to escape the hardships of farm life. Others, like Cal and Mary, saw it as a threat. They had built their lives on this land, their blood and sweat mixed with its soil. They were not willing to give it up for a handful of dollars and a promise of a future they didn't want. A meeting was called in the town hall, a small, dusty building that had seen its share of debates and disputes. The railroad representatives stood at the front of the room, their faces a mask of professional politeness. They spoke of the benefits of the railroad, of the jobs it would create, of the prosperity it would bring. They painted a picture of a gleaming future, a future where their quiet valley would be a hub of commerce and progress. But a new voice, a quiet but firm voice, rose from the back of the room. It was Cal. He stood, his presence a silent force of nature. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke the room fell silent. "What you're offering," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, "is not a future. It's a deal with the devil. You're offering us money for our land, but what you're really offering is to take our home. You're offering us a life where we're no longer the masters of our own destiny. We're farmers. We work the land with our hands. We live with the seasons. We're not a part of your future. We're a part of this land. And we're not for sale." His words resonated with the crowd. They were the words of a man who had been a loner, a drifter, a man who had chosen to make a home. They were the words of a man who knew the value of a life lived with purpose and honor. They were the words of a man who had faced down violence and had chosen a better path. The railroad representatives scoffed. They spoke of legal action, of a future that would leave them behind, of a fight they could not win. They were men of power, men of money, men of the law. They were confident they would get what they wanted, but they had underestimated the people of this valley. They had underestimated a family that had faced down bandits and had chosen to rebuild, and they had underestimated a cowboy who had never touched a woman, but who was now a man of the land, a man with a family to protect. The battle was not over. It was just beginning, and this time the stakes were higher than ever before. It was not just about survival anymore. It was about a way of life, a legacy, a home. The railroad company's response was swift and brutal. They sent not just surveyors, but a team of toughs, men with hard faces and even harder hearts. Their job was to intimidate the farmers, to make their lives a living hell, to force them to sell their land. They tore down fences, poisoned watering holes, and made veiled threats against the families. They were a new kind of bandit, a new kind of threat, a new kind of violence that was just as brutal and unforgiving as the old. Cal and the other farmers, with the quiet resolve of men who had been through a lifetime of hardship, stood their ground. They organized patrols, they set up sentries, they worked together to protect their land. The farm, which had once been a quiet haven, was now a fortress, a symbol of their defiance. But the railroad company was a force of nature, a well-oiled machine with limitless resources. They hired more men, they brought in more legal threats, they ratcheted up the pressure. They were a monster, a great iron snake that was slowly but surely coiling around the heart of their valley. Cal was the leader now, not by choice, but by necessity. He was the man who had faced down a bandit, who had saved a family, who had built a life. He was a man of the land, a man who understood the value of a life lived with purpose and honor. He was a man who knew how to fight. He organized the patrols. He taught the men how to shoot, how to defend their homes. He was a general in a war he never wanted to fight, a protector of a life he had never thought he would have. He was a man who had run from his past, and now he was a man who was fighting for his future. Mary was his partner, his confidant, his source of strength. She was the heart of the resistance, the woman who organized the women of the community, who cooked the meals for the patrols, who tended to the wounded. She was a woman of the land, a woman of the West, a woman who knew how to not only survive, but thrive. One night, the railroad toughs made their move. They came in the dead of night, a group of men with torches and axes. Their plan was to burn down a neighbor's barn, to send a message of fear and intimidation. But Cal and his men were ready. They were waiting. The fight was brutal and unforgiving. It was a clash of two worlds, a battle between a life of quiet peace and a life of brutal violence. Cal, with his quiet strength and his unwavering resolve, was a force of nature. He fought with the fury of a man who had a family to protect, a home to defend, a life to live. He was in the thick of it, his body a blur of motion. He fought with a quiet, efficient brutality, a man who knew how to use his fists, his body, his will. He was a man who had run from violence for a decade, and now he was a man who was using it to protect the ones he loved. He saw Mary on the porch, her face a mask of fear and hope. He saw her father, his face grim and determined, a rifle in his hands. He saw his son, a small, frightened face peeking from a window. He was fighting for them. He was fighting for his family, for his home, for his future. The fight ended as quickly as it had begun. The railroad toughs, surprised by the fierce resistance, retreated, their bodies a testament to their defeat. The barn was safe, the families were safe, the land was safe, but the battle was not over. The railroad company, now infuriated by their loss, would not give up. They would return with more men, more money, more legal threats. They would not rest until they had what they wanted. Cal stood in the middle of the field, his body aching, his face bruised. He looked at the faces of his neighbors, their eyes filled with a new kind of respect, a new kind of gratitude. He was a leader now, a protector, a man who had found his place in the world. He was a man who had once been a loner, a drifter, a ghost. But now he was a man with a home, a man with a family, a man with a life to live. The battle was not over, it was just beginning, and this time he was ready. The night of the confrontation had been a victory, but a costly one. Several of the farmers had been injured, and the sense of security that had settled over the valley was now replaced by a grim, weary resolve. The railroad company, true to form, escalated their tactics. They brought in a powerful lawyer, a man with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, who filed a lawsuit against every farmer who refused to sell. The legal documents were a new kind of weapon, a new kind of threat that they were not prepared to face. Cal and the other farmers found themselves in a new kind of war, a war fought not with fists and guns, but with words and legal documents. They were men of the land, men who knew how to read the sky and the soil, but they were no match for a city lawyer and a powerful corporation. The sense of defeat began to settle in. The farmers were losing hope. The constant stress, the legal threats, the fear of losing their homes was taking a toll. They were men of the land, but they were also men with families, with lives, with dreams. They were losing the will to fight. But a new voice, a new kind of hope, emerged from an unlikely place. It was a journalist, a young man with a notepad and a camera, a man who had been sent to cover the story of the railroad's progress. He had been a cynical man, a man who had seen the worst of humanity, a man who believed that every story had a price. But he had seen the defiance in the farmers' eyes. He had seen the love they had for their land, and he had seen the quiet strength of the cowboy who had led them. He approached Cal one afternoon, a quiet, respectful presence. "Mr. Stone," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I'm a reporter. I'm here to cover the story. I've been told you're the man to talk to." Cal, a man who had spent a lifetime avoiding the public eye, was hesitant. He didn't trust reporters, men who twisted words, men who sold stories. But he saw something in the young man's eyes, a quiet, honest curiosity. He decided to talk. He told him the whole story, the story of the Bandits, of his past, of the Sullivans, of the railroad. He spoke of his love for the land, of his love for his family, of his love for a life of quiet peace. He spoke with a quiet, unwavering honesty, a man who had finally found his voice. The reporter listened, his eyes wide with a new kind of respect. He had seen the stories of violence and greed, but he had never seen a story of love, of resilience, of a quiet, unwavering courage. He had found a story that was bigger than a legal battle. He had found a story that was about a way of life, a legacy, a home. He wrote the story, but he didn't write it for the railroad. He wrote it for the people. He wrote of the cowboy who had saved a family. He wrote of the quiet courage of the farmers. He wrote of the love that had blossomed in the heart of a tragedy. He wrote of a battle between a faceless corporation and a group of people who had found a home in the heart of the wilderness. The story was a sensation. It was printed in newspapers across the country, a powerful message that resonated with people who had also felt the cold, impersonal hand of progress. The public outrage was immense. The railroad company, now facing a PR nightmare, was forced to change its tactics. The legal threats, the toughs, the intimidation, it all stopped. The railroad was a powerful force, but it was no match for the power of the people, the power of a story, the power of a quiet, unwavering truth. Cal and the farmers had won, not with guns, not with fists, but with a story. They had shown the world that there was more to life than money, more to a home than a piece of paper. They had shown the world that love, family, and a quiet, honest life was a fight worth fighting. The railroad company was forced to negotiate, to offer a fair price for the land, to work with the farmers, not against them. The railroad would still come, but it would come on their terms, not on the company's. The valley would be connected to the world, but it would not be destroyed. It would be a new chapter, a new life, a new frontier, and it was all because of a quiet cowboy, a loving family, and a story that was too big to ignore. The years that followed were a testament to the quiet, hard-won peace that had settled over the valley. The railroad, true to the agreement, was built, but it was a quiet, respectful presence, a testament to the power of negotiation and the will of the people. The small town flourished, new businesses opened, and the farmers found a new kind of prosperity. Cal, now a man in his 40s, was a pillar of the community, a man of quiet authority and deep respect. He was the local sheriff, a man who enforced the law not with a gun, but with a quiet, unwavering integrity. He was a man who had once been a loner, a drifter, a man who had run from his past. But now, he was a man who was helping to shape the future. His life with Mary was a quiet, beautiful love story. Their children, Caleb and a young daughter named Sarah, were a source of constant joy. They were a family, a unit, a testament to a love that had blossomed in the heart of a tragedy. They were two broken souls who had found a way to heal each other, two lonely hearts who had found a home in each other's arms. One evening, as the sun set, Cal was sitting on the porch, his grandson on his lap. The boy, a small, bright-eyed child, looked up at him, his face filled with a childlike adoration. "Grandpa," he said, his voice a soft whisper, "tell me a story. Tell me a story about when you were a cowboy." Cal smiled, a warm, gentle smile that lit up his face. He had so many stories to tell. He could tell him of the open road, of the endless sky, of the long, lonely nights. He could tell him of the bandits, of the railroad, of the fights he had fought. But he decided to tell him a different story. He told him the story of the day he stumbled upon a farm. He told him of a man who was bleeding, of a woman who was missing, of a daughter who was filled with a quiet, unwavering strength. He told him of a cowboy who had never touched a woman, and of a farmer's daughter who had, with a single command, ordered him inside her room. He told him a story of a life he had never thought he would have. He spoke of love, of family, of a home he had found in the heart of the wilderness. He spoke of the scars of the past and of the healing power of a new life. He spoke of the fears he had faced, of the choices he had made, of the man he had become. He spoke with a quiet, unwavering honesty, a man who had finally found his voice, a man who had finally made peace with his past. The boy listened, his eyes wide with a quiet, childlike wonder. He didn't know the pain, the fear, the struggle. He only knew the love, the peace, the home. He only knew the legacy of a man who had chosen a better way, a man who had chosen a life of quiet courage and unwavering love. Cal finished the story, and the boy was silent for a long moment. Then he looked up at his grandfather, his face filled with a quiet, profound respect. "Grandpa," he said, "you're a hero." Cal smiled, a warm, gentle smile. He was no hero. He was just a man who had run from his past, and a man who had finally found a home in the heart of a family. He was a man who had once been a loner, a drifter, a ghost. But now he was a man of peace, a man of love, a man who had finally found his place in the world. He was a man who had a story to tell, a story of a cowboy who had never touched a woman, and a farmer's daughter who had, with a single command, shown him the true meaning of a life. The years continued their relentless march, and with them came the inevitable changes that time brings. The once bustling Sullivan farm became quieter as the children grew and went out into the world to forge their own lives. Caleb, their son, now a man grown, married a woman from a neighboring farm and started a family of his own, a new branch on the family tree that Cal and Mary had so lovingly nurtured. Sarah, their daughter, a bright and adventurous spirit, left for a big city to become a teacher, a testament to the new world the railroad had helped create. Cal and Mary, now a couple in their twilight years, were left alone on the farm. But they were not lonely. Their love had deepened with every passing year, a quiet, profound force that was as strong and as unyielding as the mountains that surrounded their valley. They spent their days in a comfortable, familiar rhythm, their hands still working the land, their hearts still filled with a quiet, unwavering love. Their life was a testament to the power of a quiet, peaceful existence. They had faced down bandits, a powerful corporation, and the ghosts of the past. They had faced it all together, and they had emerged not just as survivors, but as a testament to the power of love, of family, of a life lived with purpose and honor. One day, as the first signs of winter appeared on the horizon, Mary's father, the man who had been the patriarch of their family, passed away in his sleep. He was an old man, a man who had lived a full, long life, a man who had seen his family grow and prosper. His death was a quiet, peaceful one, a final farewell to a world he had loved so much. His funeral was a small, intimate affair, a gathering of family and friends who had been a part of his life. Cal, a man who had once been a stranger, was a pallbearer. His shoulders stooped with the weight of both age and a deep, abiding respect for the man who had been his father. He was a man who had once been a loner, a man who had run from families, and now he was a man who was helping to carry a family to its final resting place. He looked at Mary, her face a mask of quiet grief. She was a strong woman, a woman of the West, a woman who had faced down so much. But now she was just a woman who had lost her father, a woman who needed a hand to hold, a shoulder to cry on. He took her hand, his fingers interlaced with hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence, his quiet strength, his unwavering love was all she needed. He was her rock, her anchor, her home. He was a man who had once been broken, and now he was a man who was helping to heal a family. As they stood by the grave, the cold wind whipping through the air, Cal looked at the endless, open sky. He had come here, a cowboy with a broken past, and he had found a new life, a new frontier, a new kind of love. He had found a home, a family, a wife. He had found a life that was worth fighting for, a life that was worth living. He was a man who had finally found his place in the world. And that place was right here, with her, with this family, with this life he had finally found. The final chapters of a life are often the most beautiful. They are a time of reflection, of quiet contemplation, of a deep, abiding love that has been tested by the trials of time and has emerged stronger for it. For Cal and Mary, their final years were a testament to the life they had built together, a life of quiet peace and unwavering love. They spent their days in a comfortable, familiar rhythm, their hands still working the land, their hearts still filled with a quiet, unwavering love. They would sit on the porch, their hands intertwined, their bodies a single, loving silhouette against the setting sun. They would talk of the past, of the struggles they had faced, of the victories they had won. They would talk of their children, of their grandchildren, of the family they had built. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and violet, Cal looked at Mary, his eyes filled with a quiet, profound love. She was an old woman now, her face etched with the lines of a life lived with purpose and honor. But to him, she was still the young, fierce woman who had, with a single command, ordered him inside her room. "Mary," he said, his voice a low, unsteady rumble, I have a promise to keep." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet, expectant light. "I promised you," he said, his voice a whisper, "that I would be here, always. I promised you that I would be your home, your family, your friend. I promised you that I would be your husband, and I'll be yours forever." Tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, Cal," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You've been all of those things, and so much more. You're my home, my family, my love. You're everything to me." He leaned in and he kissed her. It was a slow, tender kiss, a kiss born not of passion, but of a deep, profound love, a kiss that sealed a lifetime of promises, a kiss that marked a final, beautiful chapter. He held her, his arms wrapped tightly around her. He was a man who had never touched a woman, and now he was holding the one he loved, the one who had made him whole. They sat there for a long time, their bodies a single, loving silhouette against the setting sun. The world was at peace, and for the first time in a very long time, so were they. They had faced down their demons. They had faced down a world that had tried to break them, and they had emerged victorious. They had found a life that was worth living, a life that was worth fighting for. Cal, a man who had once been a ghost, was now a man of presence, a man of purpose, a man of love. He was a husband, a father, a grandfather. He was a man who had finally found his place in the world, and that place was right here, with her, with this family, with this life he had finally found. The sun set, casting a long, beautiful shadow over the valley. It was a final farewell to a life that had been lived with quiet courage and unwavering love. The final scene takes place many years later, on a warm, sun-drenched afternoon on the old Sullivan farm. The farm is now a place of history, a place of memory, a place of love. The old farmhouse stands proud and strong, its walls a testament to a life lived with purpose and honor. The barn, rebuilt with Cal's own hands, is a place of history, a place where a new generation of farmers learns the trade. A young man, a boy in his 20s, is working in the fields, his hands a constant testament to his love for the land. He is a man of the land, a man of the West, a man of quiet strength and unwavering resolve. He is the grandson of Cal and Mary, the son of Caleb, the heir to a legacy that began with a single act of courage. He is working in the fields when an old, dusty truck pulls up to the fence. An old man, a man with a tired face and a kind smile, gets out of the truck. He is a reporter, a man who had once written a story about a cowboy and a farm. He had come back to see the legacy, to see the end of the story. He approached the young man, his hand extended. "Hello," he said, his voice a low, unsteady rumble. "My name is John. I'm a reporter. I'm here to write a story about this place. I understand this was your grandfather's farm, the one who faced down the bandits and the railroad." The young man smiled, a warm, gentle smile that was so much like his grandfather's. "Yes," he said, "this was his farm. It still is." He told the reporter the whole story, the story of a cowboy who had stumbled upon a farm, of a man who had never touched a woman, and of a farmer's daughter who had, with a single command, ordered him inside her room. He spoke of the struggles they had faced, of the victories they had won, of the love that had blossomed in the heart of a tragedy. He spoke with a quiet, unwavering honesty, a man who was living a legacy, a man who was a part of a story. The reporter listened, his eyes wide with a quiet, profound respect. He had heard the story before, but he had never heard it from a man who was living it. He had never seen a legacy, a love, a life that was so real, so true, so beautiful. He took out his notepad and his pen. He was a man who had seen the worst of humanity, but he had also seen the best. He had seen the power of a story, the power of a love, the power of a life lived with purpose and honor. He was a man who had come back to write a final chapter, a final farewell to a life that had been lived with quiet courage and unwavering love. The young man looked at the reporter, his eyes filled with a quiet, profound light. "My grandfather," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "He always told me that a man's legacy isn't about the fights he wins, but about the life he builds. He told me that a man's worth isn't in what he owns, but in who he loves." The reporter nodded, a silent tear tracing a path down his cheek. He had found his story. He had found the final chapter. He had found the legacy. He was a man who had come to write a story, and he was leaving with a truth. He was leaving with the knowledge that a new life was possible, a new kind of love was possible, a new kind of future was possible. And it was all because of a cowboy who had never touched a woman, and a farmer's daughter who had, with a single command, shown him the true meaning of a life.